They were just kids, cold, hungry, and left behind like yesterday's trash. No one in town would help them. No one even looked their way, until a quiet, limping stranger rode past. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. But something in his eyes said he wasn't going to let them vanish like ghosts. What happened next? No one in Briar Hollow saw coming. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's jump into the story. The wind in Briar Hollow had a voice of its own. Cold, restless, and always carrying dust. It rolled over dry fields and empty roads, whispering of things left behind, like memories, promises, and sometimes people. At the very edge of this small town, where broken fences leaned like old men too tired to stand, there was an old handcart tucked behind a half-collapsed barn. It looked like junk, something forgotten. But inside, 3 children huddled beneath a thin sheet patched with clumsy stitches, and hope too fragile to hold up against the wind. Nora was the oldest, 11, but her eyes had seen enough pain for 2 lifetimes. Her younger brother Micah, 9, sat close beside her, wrapping his arms around the smallest of them all, Rosie, only 5, who had a cough that came like thunder and stayed like a storm. It rattled her tiny chest with every breath. A week ago, their world had fallen apart. Their parents, traveling through Briar Hollow in search of work, had fallen ill with fever. The town's doctor was away. No one else stepped in. By the time the sun had risen the next morning, both parents were gone, buried quietly behind the churchyard. The townspeople called it unlucky. They left a few stale biscuits outside the cart and said the children had to move on. "We don't want trouble," said the grocer. "This ain't a charity," said the woman who ran the boarding house. Their faces held more fear than cruelty, but the result was the same. The children were alone. Nora tried to stay brave. Each day, she went door to door, knocking gently, asking softly, "Do you have some bread? My sister is sick." But doors closed before her words could finish. Curtains twitched. No one wanted to catch the bad luck, and no one wanted to get involved. At night, when the cold crept in, Micah would try to keep Rosie warm, whispering stories their father used to tell about magic horses and skies full of stars. Nora would sit up as long as she could, hoping to hear footsteps, a friendly voice, anything, but there was only wind and silence. Then, on the 5th evening, something strange happened. As the sun dipped behind the hills, turning the sky a soft, aching shade of orange, a horse's slow, steady steps echoed down the dusty road. Not the clip-clop of a town horse hauling hay or the sharp march of a deputy on duty. No, this sound was different. Heavy, tired, like the horse had been riding for years and still had nowhere to go. A figure sat tall in the saddle. A man, long coat, wide-brimmed hat, a slight limp that made him lean when he dismounted. He stopped, just outside the barn, eyes resting on the children's small shelter. Tom Merritt didn't speak. Not to the kids. Not to anyone. He was a man made of shadows, his past hidden in the lines of his face, his pain tucked somewhere behind a pair of quiet, tired eyes. Most folks in Briar Hollow didn't know his name. They only knew that he came and went without staying, never buying more than jerky and bullets and never looking anyone in the eye. But something about the children held his gaze. He didn't approach. Not yet. He stood still, studying them, 3 little souls trying to fight the wind with nothing but a blanket and hope. Nora saw him. Her body went stiff, heart pounding. She held Rosie tighter, unsure whether to run or stay. Micah's hand found a rock nearby, just in case. But Tom didn't move. He simply tipped his hat and turned, walking his horse toward the ridge on the far side of the field. That night, the children heard something again. Footsteps, but not coming toward them. Instead, when they opened their eyes the next morning, they found a bundle near the wagon, a folded wool blanket, a tin of beans, a chunk of jerky, and a canteen of water. Micah stared. "It's food," he whispered, like he might scare it away. Nora looked toward the ridge where a small fire burned in the distance. It had to be him. For the first time in days, Rosie smiled, just a little. Enough to make Nora's throat tighten, and Micah forget how cold he was. The wind still blew through Briar Hollow. But now it carried something new. Not safety, not answers, but something like a question. Why had the man stayed? Tom Merritt didn't come to Briar Hollow looking for anything. In fact, he had spent the last 10 years riding away from everything. He didn't have a map or a goal or even a place he called home. All he had was a horse named Jasper, a limp that never healed right, and a saddlebag full of silence. That was all he allowed himself to carry now. Silence and enough supplies to survive the road. Tom had once been a man with a wife, a child, a warm porch, and laughter that filled a little house with light. But a fire had taken it all in a single night. He had gone out for bread. By the time he returned, smoke filled the sky. There was nothing left but ash and echoes. After that, he didn't stay anywhere for long. He became a shadow on horseback, slipping between towns like a whisper. People couldn't quite hear. He never asked for help. He never offered any until now. He had seen the children near the old barn. That first evening as he rode past, he had tried to look away. But something about them, so still, so small, pressed against his heart in a way that made it hard to breathe. He didn't stop that day, but he didn't leave either. Instead, Tom set up camp on the ridge above them, just close enough to watch. At night, he could see Nora struggling to light a fire. He saw Micah holding Rosie as her coughing grew worse. He saw the way Nora looked toward the town with eyes that had already learned not to hope, and the truth was, he saw himself in them. The next morning, without a word, he left food and water near their wagon. It wasn't much, just enough to say, "Someone sees you." He kept doing it. Each morning the children found something new, a wool blanket, another tin of beans, a small bag of oats. Nora began waking up earlier, hoping to catch a glimpse of their silent helper. But Tom always stayed hidden, always watching, never speaking. Still, the children felt his presence, and slowly, cautiously, they began to trust it. Tom fixed the broken wheel on their handcart without them knowing. He patched a tear in the wagon's tarp, and one afternoon when the wind picked up and the sky turned gray, he built a better fire ring for them, flat stones arranged carefully around a neat pile of dry wood. That was the first time he spoke. Nora had come out of the wagon and found him crouched near the fire, her breath caught in her throat. Tom looked up, not smiling, just nodding once. "Try lighting it now," he said, his voice low and rough like gravel on a country road. Nora blinked, unsure. "What if it goes out again?" "Then you try again." She crouched down beside him. Her hands trembled, but he guided her gently. "Dry wood, strike firm. Give it air." The flame caught. Nora's eyes widened. "It worked." Tom stood, dusting off his hands. "It will keep you warm longer this way." And just like that, he walked off into the tall grass, leaving only the smell of smoke and a tiny spark of something new behind. That evening, Tom returned, with a bundle of wild roots and 2 hand-carved spoons. He gave one to Micah without a word, then pulled a knife from his belt and handed it to the boy. "Careful. Always carve away from your fingers." Micah held the blade like treasure. "Can I make something too?" Tom nodded. "Start with a stick. Make it smooth." Each day after that, he brought more than supplies. He brought lessons. He showed Nora how to find berries that wouldn't make them sick. He taught Micah how to shape wood into little animals. Even Rosie, though still weak, would watch him from the wagon window with wide, curious eyes. Once, she whispered, "Is he a cowboy?" Micah shrugged. "I think he's something else." Tom didn't say much. His words were always short, clipped, but his actions spoke loudly. He fixed what was broken. He gave without asking, and he never asked for anything in return. Nora had never met a man like him. Adults in her life had always taken time, attention, trust. But Tom only gave. One night, as the wind howled and the fire crackled, Tom sat nearby, whittling something quietly in the shadows. Nora watched him from across the flames. "Why are you helping us?" she asked softly. Tom didn't look up. He just kept carving. "Because someone should," he said. It wasn't a full answer, but it was enough. Rosie was getting stronger. Her cough still came, but less now. Micah smiled more, especially when he finished carving a tiny wooden bird. Nora had learned how to make tea from dry mint leaves, and every time they saw Tom at dawn or dusk, something inside them felt steadier. He was still a stranger, still wrapped in silence, but no longer unknown. He had no past they could see, but he was becoming part of their future. Life around the broken wagon began to feel less like surviving and more like living. Rosie's coughing had softened, replaced by giggles that came out like little hiccups of happiness. Her cheeks, once pale, now held a soft pink glow. Micah spent his mornings carving animals from bits of wood, always showing them proudly to Tom, who would give a silent nod of approval. Nora had learned how to make a fire in any kind of weather and how to find herbs that made a warm, calming tea. Tom was still quiet. He never told them stories, never shared where he came from or why he had a limp. But his presence was constant, like the fire he built, steady and safe. He never slept near them, but he was always close, always watching. The children had started calling him Mr. Tom, though he never asked for a name. Things were finally starting to feel okay. But good. Things in Briar Hollow never lasted long without someone trying to break them. It happened late one afternoon. The sky was the color of ripe peaches and the breeze was gentle. Micah was sitting near the cart carving a fox from a crooked branch. Nora was inside, trying to get Rosie to eat a few bites of boiled root. That's when the dust kicked up. 2 men on horses came riding down the path toward the old barn, their laughter loud and sharp like broken glass. They were strangers, Kirk and Balin, drifters. Their boots were cracked, their faces rough, and their eyes carried the kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. "Well, well," Kirk said, sliding off his horse with a smirk. "Looks like we found ourselves a little camp." Micah stood up quickly, carving knife still in hand. His knees trembled. "You should go," he said, voice shaking. Balin grinned. "You hear that? Boy thinks he's tough." Kirk started walking toward the wagon. "Got any food in there, sweetheart?" he called toward the cart. "Any coin? We'd be happy to help lighten your load." Nora stepped out, blocking the entrance. Her hands were fists. Her heart beat so loud she couldn't hear anything else. "Please leave. We don't have anything for you." "Oh, I think you do," Kirk said, reaching for her shoulder. And that's when they heard the click, a quiet, heavy sound, the sound of a rifle being cocked. The drifters froze. From the edge of the tree line, Tom stepped forward. His coat flapped slightly in the wind. The rifle in his hands was steady, aimed right at Kirk's chest. "Move on," Tom said, his voice low and calm. "You won't be warned again." Kirk let out a short laugh, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You think one old man's gonna scare us?" Tom didn't blink. "Try me." Something about the way he stood, still as stone, made the laughter fade. Balin shifted nervously. "Let's just go." Kirk hesitated. He looked from the rifle to Tom's face, trying to read him. What he saw there made the hair on his neck stand up. Tom's eyes weren't angry. They were empty. Cold. Like someone who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. Without another word, the 2 men climbed back on their horses and rode off, the dust swallowing their shapes. Tom didn't lower the rifle right away. He stood there watching the horizon, listening for the sound of return. Only when the silence stretched long did he finally relax. Nora stood frozen. Her legs felt like jelly. Micah dropped his knife. Rosie, watching from the cart, whispered, "Mr. Tom?" Tom didn't answer. He just looked at the kids, then at the fire, and sat down beside it. His hands shook just a little as he reached for a stick. Nora walked over, eyes full of tears. She didn't speak. She simply dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around him. At first, Tom didn't move. He looked down, confused, stiff. But slowly, awkwardly, his hand came up and rested on her shoulder. Micah came next, leaning in, his small body shaking from the leftover fear. Rosie followed, crawling into Tom's lap without asking. She leaned her head against his chest and let out a quiet sigh. Tom sat there, surrounded by 3 small children clinging to him like roots to solid ground. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. But something had changed. He hadn't just helped them. He had claimed them, and now they were his to protect. The next morning, Tom did something he hadn't done in a long time. He led the children into town. The people of Briar Hollow watched from windows and doorways as the broken cowboy, once silent and distant, walked down Main Street beside 3 children who looked stronger than ever before. Tom didn't knock on doors. He didn't ask for help. He simply walked into the general store and bought what they needed: food, medicine, clean clothes. He paid with his own coin. Then he turned and walked out. The town didn't know what to say, but something in their hearts stirred, because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stay. The town of Briar Hollow had always moved on quickly. It forgot strangers faster than it remembered kindness. But this time, something was different. Tom Merritt didn't ride away after that day. He stayed. Every morning, he rose with the sun, helped Nora gather kindling, checked Rosie's breathing, and sharpened Micah's carving knife. He never said much, but he was always there, like the trees, the wind, the rising dawn. Tom wasn't a man of many plans, but he had a quiet mission now: build a real home for the children. Not just shelter, a place where they could grow, where they could laugh without fear, where Rosie didn't have to cough under a thin blanket and Micah didn't have to sleep with a stick in hand for protection. So he began. No one gave him permission. No one offered help at first, but that didn't stop him. Tom started with the broken barn. He cleared out the rusted tools and broken boards, patched the roof with whatever he could find, and tore down the old handcart the children had been living in to use its wheels and beams. He built walls strong enough to keep the wind out and windows just wide enough to let light in. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. One morning, Nora helped him carry water. Micah stood beside him, handing nails. Rosie sat in the grass, humming to herself, tying pieces of wild grass into little crowns. Tom worked in silence, but inside something was shifting. He had spent years running from the past. Now, with every board he hammered and every corner he swept clean, he was building something new, not just for the children, but for himself. People in town began to notice. Mrs. Callan, who once turned away when Nora knocked on her door, showed up one morning with a warm pie wrapped in a towel. Figured they might like something sweet, she said, avoiding Tom's eyes. Later, Mr. Harvin, a retired carpenter, walked over with a toolbox. "You're using the wrong nails for that frame," he grunted, before kneeling beside Tom without waiting for an answer. Others followed. A teacher brought books. The grocer gave a sack of apples. Even the mayor's wife left a small quilt folded neatly on their new doorstep. Something was changing in Briar Hollow, not because of a sermon, or a law, or some grand event, but because one quiet man had stood between fear and innocence, and stayed. Tom still didn't talk about his past. He didn't tell the children about the fire that stole his family, or the guilt that chased him from town to town, but he didn't need to. His silence spoke in other ways, through the meals he cooked, the roof he fixed, the nights he sat beside Rosie's bed until her cough quieted. One warm afternoon, Tom took the children up a hill, behind their new home. The sun dipped low, casting gold across the field of tall grass. He looked out at the town below, the place that had once turned its back on the children, and on him. Nora sat beside him. "Will you ever leave?" she asked. Tom looked down at her. Her eyes were no longer afraid, just curious. "No," he said, voice steady. "Not anymore." Micah grinned and rolled in the grass. Rosie giggled, chasing a butterfly with arms too small to reach but hope too big to quit. They stayed there until the stars came out. That night, something unexpected happened. The townspeople gathered. One by one, they arrived with candles and lanterns, walking quietly toward the barn. They didn't speak loudly. They didn't sing hymns or read speeches. They just stood outside holding the light. Mr. Harvin stepped forward and cleared his throat. "We figured this place needs a name," he said. Tom looked confused. "What for?" Mrs. Callan answered gently. "So that others who find themselves with nowhere to go know there's a place for them here too." A small wooden sign was lifted and hung over the front door. It read, "Safe Hollow." It wasn't named after Tom or the children. It was named after what they had all created together. Something rare, something brave, something quietly beautiful. Tom stood in the doorway, Rosie in his arms, Micah by his side, and Nora holding the edge of his coat like it was the safest place in the world. He didn't cry, but something in his chest, something long frozen, began to warm. He had come to Briar, Hollow as a stranger with no name, no past, and no future, but he stayed. Not as a cowboy, not as a ghost, as a father.